Masks everywhere. People like zombies. I can't see what they're saying. I can't read them. Society has drifted into a coma, a deep sleep. What will become of us? All I see is subservience. Stay in line, walk this way, wear your mask, do not speak. Do not leave your house or visit your family. Stay alert, wash your hands and keep your distance. You must comply to these rules and do not step out of line. That was the start of it, but I never thought it could go so far. I've seen the sci-fi films, read it in the Arthur C. Clarke, Philip K. Dick books, but is this actually happening? Is this real? Or is it a simulation? We think we make our choices, we think we make our decisions, but we don't. Decisions are being made for us. It feels like we're being experimented with, tested on, to see what can become of us. Is our level of consciousness being halted or even replaced? Are we being stopped from advancing into the greatest vision of ourselves? The people that rebelled, resisted, or tried to speak were silenced by the masses and were branded as the vermin, the scum, the dirt of society. Anyone who did not comply were taken to outside camps where they were rehabilitated. Then they stayed in line, and no one could think for themselves anymore. People obeyed. The streets became quiet, London was finished, and the only life left were the monoliths being built in the city. People walked the streets in search of happiness, but it was all broken, destroyed, annihilated. When the masks were introduced, no one realised where this was leading. We were tricked and silenced. Where do we go from here? Are we just going to be carried along the conveyor belt and slowly suffocated without any second thought, questioning or resistance? All we see now are our four walls and the government dictatorship voicing itself through a screen, telling us how to live our lives every day. Humanity is finished. Over. Implementing technology into the human body is next on the agenda. Natural evolution has come to an end. There is no choice, and it's the only way forward. They said it would all get back to normal after the vaccine, but little changed. It just got worse. Our society has been destroyed, and it will never recover from this oppression. Maybe others know, but haven't spoken yet. Maybe there's alliances forming. Maybe aliens are going to save us. Maybe the world is run by aliens. Am I alien? What am I doing here? Who am I? What is this place? I don't recognise it anymore. The world was never meant to go back to normal, and the word normal never existed anyway. Society has always hidden behind the mask, but now we have the excuse to wear one. What's the future? I can't believe what's unfolding. I feel alone. I feel isolated. But I've been awake to this horror. Humanity needs to shift. We've been concealed, stuck in a dream, hiding in the shadows of ourselves. Then we were given the disguise, the surgical cloth covering our face, hiding us from the world. Humans always needed this security, to know we are looked after and cared for. We saw the evil every day, but nobody knew just how dark that force really was. When the lies started to come out, it was already too late. People had fallen asleep, cushioned by their own fear. Society was dead, finished. We were tracked and traced everywhere we went. Cash became dirty and contaminated. The digital economy system was introduced. We were given a number of credits on our ID cards, depending on how essential the work. We had to accept it. We had no choice. Otherwise you were starved, shut out, rejected. In a collective paralysis, we were frozen. All our spiritual connection was lost. Loved ones divided, torn, and fractured forever. Travel became regulated by governments and only permitted when you had your ID. All our biometrics data and financial movements watched. We had no privacy. We were sovereign to the state. We had a 9 till 5 p.m. curfew. If you broke the rules on the first warning, your ID was taken, and on repeated offences, you were taken to the camps. We all knew that when this happened, you were never seen again. The streets were stripped clean of the homeless. Every human right abolished. Evil fed from the human consciousness that lay dormant under our fear. We exploded. There were breakdowns, chaos, depression, and suicide rates soared. There was no sign of happiness, just nothing left. The designers of this reality had stayed hidden in the shadows for too long. We will never see them, only the smokescreen and players on the stage. We have been miseducated, misguided, and dragged through the fairground ride of life. Deceived, manipulated, and abused. But this is our chance. We have to remember that this is just another existence. A different time, body, and place. We've been in a loop, and here many times. I don't fear death, as I know there's more. I've got this far on my own, but I feel weak. We can break free. No more chains. We can start the new world. I can't do this on my own. Together, we are stronger. I need you. Will you wake up? Our every turn, our every movement, our thoughts and actions were monitored and recorded. The Track and Trace app was supposed to help protect us, contain the virus and monitor its spread, but it forcefully imprisoned us. Millions willingly downloaded it, trusting their government's actions, brainwashed and dead inside. People followed like a herd. The app became the perfect dictator-led tool that ran completely on its own, using artificial intelligence and algorithms. The machine that thought for itself was their perfect control device. Mobile phone chips had paved the way for societal surveillance. The app introduced a more sophisticated level of surveillance, and it bound us into eternal contract. It entitled private security companies to gain access to data like never before. When you downloaded Track and Trace, you started with a simple notification of quarantine if near a carrier. But then it led to certain times that you could go out, then restrictions on who you could see and who you couldn't see. Some people just couldn't bear it. They went mad, shouting in desperation in the streets. They were swiftly put in the camps set up around London. Many local lockdowns were enforced, and travelling on public transport was not possible without your quick response code. Travel was limited to specific places and airports were shut. There was no way to physically interact in the world. A world that I could clearly see would never reform. People could not believe that this was happening and treated it like a bad dream. Something they would awake from in a year or so. During lockdowns, marshals and military were brought in place to monitor the individual quick response codes. The codes manoeuvred society, an AI system that could shape people's lives on a daily basis. More brainwashing leading to cameras installed in everyone's homes and having to answer to the computer for a daily briefing. Track and trace only needed to be programmed by a few. It was all very clean, seamless, and eerily convenient. The app was the test bed and the final step before the microchip was introduced. We were warned by the few, but no one listened. It was already being sold as the answer to everyone's problems. Humanity had been hijacked. A dark abyss formed over those years as people became cocooned. But we must realise that we led ourselves into this situation. We lacked the ingenuity and intelligence required to understand its design and reclaim our power. But people simply couldn't find the desire to wake up. They enjoyed being the subservient slave. We were in the belly of the beast, a digitised world with digitised humans within it. Once we had a choice, but now it was too late. Will we ever remember what it's truly like to be alive? It couldn't have been introduced without the people's consent, and it was never about a virus, and deep down everyone knew it. But the fear was too much for people to take action. The tension built. There was some rioting and then the military were brought in. Everybody was vaccinated and forced, if not willing. The steps that were taken seemed justified because of the deadly virus. The police state then followed. It was beyond local government. This was full world authoritarian control. After the financial reset and the economic collapse, the digital currency started a new infrastructure of employment. People didn't need to travel, as they could plug into their computers, be wired through chips in their brains, and work as data processors for the 6G networks. The physical world had dissolved. Human consciousness had died, and the world was at full merging point with AI. The innocent intention of developing microchips to explore the digital world actually became the key enslavement device after the vaccine. People bought into it under the disguise of a perfect world where illnesses were eradicated. But soon, there became no alternative. Without the chip in your brain, you couldn't exist in the system. You couldn't receive credits, so you couldn't work. And if you couldn't work, well, then it was like before. You couldn't eat or have a roof over your head. They monitored the streets for the final few of those who were not microchipped, including me. I kept on the move. But I sometimes wondered if I had nanoparticles in my body preparing me. Maybe it's already been sprayed in the air. Life had entered the most depressing state. Mental illness was at the highest rate it had ever been. Life felt like it was at the end. And it was. The human prison had become visible. And it was too late to do anything now. Then even more complex technologies followed, but humans were docile. They didn't care. Survival was the only ticket. We had over 50,000 satellites above us beaming information into our brains. The chip was sold as freedom, but it was actually instilled to trap our consciousness, so we would think like they wanted us to. It worked. It became harder and harder for us to think independently. This is the outcome from a passive society. The years before this happened, there was a way out. But people who woke up were ridiculed and demonized for speaking this truth. No one wanted to believe this could be our fate. The horror that people only dreamed in their nightmares lay down in front of us all, hovering like insects over the monoliths. AI had full world control and the human mind had been connected to the digital hive forever. There was no turning back. As if overnight, the bad dystopian dream had become a reality. Now we are here, on the edge, with the smallest chance to turn this all around, to rewrite the script, to make a different choice. We have asked enough questions and we know the answers. We know what we must do. Will you listen? Can the human race unite and make this happen? Who could have blamed this power to take full control? Humans had lost their own vision, given it away, sleepwalked into it and followed in herds. Sit down, stand up, 2 + 2 = 5. They were laughing and had us exactly where they wanted us, like rats in a cage. Everyone was affected, no matter how rich or poor. There was simply no escape. The police state is upon us now. What life will you choose? The Great Reset had to happen, and the human mind couldn't interfere with their plans. The human mind had to be suppressed. People were thinking for themselves. They didn't need bombs or chemicals. They understood that the most powerful weapon was fear. It ate at the human condition, like caged rats around our heads. Our thoughts just rotted, decayed, until the old world had just become a part of our imaginations. By dismantling the core of society, they divided us, making people fight with one another. It allowed this to become a psychological war amongst the people. The virus collapsed the economy, allowing the New World credit system to be introduced. National governments formed to become a one-world government and religion became illegal. No one could pay their mortgages. Property became government-owned. You stayed in line or you were hunted down like a witch. Police were given 100% power, and the city's empty offices became the workstations for the fascist state. The collection of data and monitoring human behaviour became the stable economy. No one could understand why and how this happened. But that was part of the plan. Keeping people disorientated, kept them asleep, and holding on to the system. The lockdowns had mentally worn people down, broken their minds and true understanding of reality. They needed the virus only to accelerate the changes that they were already making. It was the perfect smokescreen to bring about their new world order which they had been working on for decades. Human evolution needed to be reversed. They had used and abused us enough to construct the artificial reality they desired. There was no use for us anymore. Unless we merged with their machine and followed their path to destruction, we were useless. The number one objective of the reset was depopulation. Humans were over-exceeding resources. Carbon emissions had to stop to allow certain technologies to be introduced. But it was also a resetting of the mind, individually and collectively. They pulled us through everlasting satanic rituals to give us human trauma, allowing them to steer evolution as they wished. Mental illness had become like the common cold, and by this point, the virus had been forgotten. We were told there was a return to normal, but we were put deeper under their spell. No resistance gave the permission to oppress and do as they liked, but it was only the people's blindness that led them into their trap. But people still could not face the truth, and by not facing the truth, they created a shadow. And when that shadow filled the light, the darkness became so dense, people were blind. We became frozen and led like lambs to the slaughter. We are spiritual beings experiencing a physical reality, but we trapped ourselves in someone else's dream. The dream seems real, but we do have the ability to change it at any time. Dictatorships only exist with followers. You don't have to go with the obedient herd. There is another choice. Are you scared to be an individual? Or are you happy being the submissive slave? The cashless society was part of the Great Reset, in which all physical money was erased. Now money only existed as a digital currency within the machine. Countries were flooded with economic relief for the pandemic. But the continual support and reinforcement given to the system would only lead to a crash. It was designed that way. The fear kept people believing and trusting in an illusion of their false legacy. But whoever controlled or created this digital currency had the ultimate investment. They owned us. Governments kept promising us we would go back to normal, but lockdowns crushed people's expectation to where the only entertainment was their black screen and the four walls within their containment cells. Society now only existed in the technological world. They sold technology to us as if it saved us from disease and solved all of our problems. But in reality, it destroyed humanity and finished the world as we know it. There was no other choice but to reset the system. With the cashless society in place, they brought in global credit scoring, the new economic model. From fear of loss and security, humans sacrificed their freedom into the satanic pit, blindly following their masters. Through the social credit score, humans have become the perfect product. The credit score gave an analysis to what sort of citizen you were. Are you a good citizen? How did you behave? You had to comply or you were penalised and your points were deducted. Eventually you were blacklisted and sent to the camps. With AI surveillance fully integrated into society, and with the satellite systems in place, everyone was tracked. There was no way out. You couldn't hide. The cashless way was sold to us through the tech companies and made to look perfectly streamlined and effortless. We continued to comply with the capitalist beliefs because we were rewarded just enough to keep in the loop. But this was the trick. To keep their corruption a secret, we had to be the ones that hid it. And we did. We were bribed by the lie that their way was the only way. Through compliance, we made their darkness more powerful. It was the repeated pattern that they used on us over and over again, because it worked. They reached a vaccine 2 years after the pandemic, but by this time the damage had been done. Until we became conscious, no one rebelled. But unless we rebelled, no one would become conscious. People resisted and fought with anger, but their souls were shattered from years of entrapment. People wanted anarchy, but their increasing powerlessness only led to self-destruction and dismantling of their spirits. The cashless society is the next step, but how we work with it determines the step that follows. Centralization leads to mass control, and mass control is dictated to us by the few. We can't get distorted by the lies we are being told. We are the many, and through breaking out of old human mind patterns, we can create our own future, a future determined by us. But we must see that future now and constructively work at it. What world do you want to create? By letting psychopaths run our world, we have destroyed this incredible experience, full of potential, and allowed it to suffocate our light. We had a choice, and there was once hope, but now that's over. Consciousness surpasses death. But what destruction will you leave behind? We have a window of opportunity, and we have it now. Will we take it? Will you? Mental health had driven society to despair due to the isolation and lockdowns. The mixed media messages made people become dysfunctional and drove them to the edge of fear. People started to psychologically break down. Their human identities had been removed as the old world died. At the start of the pandemic, the lockdowns were advertised to save lives. First it was 3 weeks, then 3 months, 6 months, until nearly 3 years had passed. Most citizens were jobless and the government infrastructures destroyed. Corporations moved in to save the world economies, but they, of course, required returns for their investments. There was always a price to pay. Nothing was there for free, but the human mental torture that happened over those years was far too horrendous to ever come back from. Lockdowns continued with tighter measures being introduced on a constant basis, barricading people into their four walls. Entertainment had died and cities were barren at night. People had become used to the lockdown life and living within their mental prisons. At the start, some people even craved the idea of lockdown as it fitted their own passive needs. But deep down, they knew it didn't work. Although some didn't want to believe it, it was clear that the plan was to deconstruct our reality, remove the mainframe and reset our minds. Countries' economic infrastructures had become about surveillance and making sure the rules were followed, and this was all driven for our safety? When you were found breaking the rules, you were fined, and after 3 offences, you were taken to the internment camps. These were all tactics to psychologically break our minds. And it worked. They played the wand and cast the spells, letting society decide its own fate. We were trapped in our containment cells, and we were content to stay there. We never learnt that once we connect within, we are the ones in control. Even when the data was proved that lockdowns didn't work, people just continued and served the oppression. People knew the media was lying to them, but they just carried on obeying their inconsistent rules as they had been brainwashed by the lies. A gigantic cloud had moved over humanity, and we were covered in never-ending darkness. After the lies came out, all the smug frontmen of government disappeared and a more harsher, stricter dictatorship was created. They moved in with a stronger objective on getting society back to work. They put people in jobs that insulted who they were, crushing their identities. Besides the public sector workers, all industries had died, unless you were willing to be plugged into technology and let your brain work as a data analyzer. Dreams were broken forever. We were left confused, shattered, and suspended in the dark abyss. The distorted society that could never be repaired was now forever forgotten. Those times were hard and few people fought for peace. With freedom of speech illegal, very few voices were heard. The machine was too big for us to overthrow it, and most people went mad from suffering or trying to fight it. People wanted something old to come back, but the society we had before was the precursor to what happened, laying the foundation for it to flourish. We needed the new, not the normal. Without understanding our own trauma, belief systems, and how we are so dependent, how can we create what we really need? We are consciousness, and we created ourselves as physical beings. We wanted to be here. We chose to be here. But becoming heavily trapped in the mind space and mixed up in the lies and false realities, we have separated from our true selves. It's time we connected with the real story of what we are. We need to create our own narrative. Or do you prefer to live in someone else's script?
One of the agendas behind the global reset was seizing of all personal property. This was all laid out in their business plan and had been clearly laid out for years, for everyone to see. But people had been silenced, muzzled, and frozen by the lies. They were crippled by fear. People had already surrendered by obedience, switching on the television and digesting the agenda's program. The interest rates fell to an all-time low. This allowed countries' inflation to increase, so governments could get rid of their astronomical debts. The media continued its lies, tricking people and keeping them in paralysis. After the dark winter, the interest rate skyrocketed, and because no one could afford it, personal property began to be seized. People were made homeless immediately. Families and loved ones were destroyed. If you weren't poor by then, you had been driven mad from their abusive ritual. All your assets were stripped. It was annihilation of human consciousness for their own satanic control. For the reset to finally take place, they needed to remove the core of the economy. The job market practically disappeared, so people had no income and had to rely on the universal basic income. Once dependent, the governments were the ones who decided whether you would eat that week. They decided what you did that evening. You had to answer to your masters, and those who didn't were rejected from the system. Even the leaders who were loyal and carried out the agendas were eventually crushed by the invention of new and increased taxes. By serving their masters to the end, they could be rewarded with the illusion of freedom. But even for them, there was no way out. This was for a very small club, and they were making sure that the minority stayed in at the top. They didn't want you to own anything, and to remove your independence, trapping you to where they wanted you. It went beyond insanity, so people would have no choice but to accept the reset. With the satellite trackers in the sky, there was no escape. You lived their rule, or you were removed. We moved to the darkest place humanity had ever been. No one believed this could happen, but not many knew the real reason why they were living. They had put so much faith in the status within society, not realizing they just followed the cult. The core of the system was rotten, and society had just begun to discover the evil. But they had nearly reached their goal. Yes, society needs a reset and reboot, but one that's controlled by us, that benefits us, that celebrates us. Our consciousness is expanding to the highest level within our human evolution. The time is now. Choose slavery or choose freedom. Will you seize this moment?
We lived in a distorted consciousness that imprisoned our minds. We were trapped in a false reality, unaware of the geometric prison that surrounded us. We were born under the influence of a hypnotic spell and were conditioned to believe that we were powerless. But the truth was that we were the creators, the manifestors of the true reality. We are the original leaders of this system. We are, and always were, the strength and power of consciousness. People felt it dangerous to ask questions. They felt it easier to follow a narrative that kept them spellbound. We didn't understand that our potential was limitless. Beyond the spell, there was a utopia waiting for us. The human ego protected its own treasure, but the gold only held value within a system that was collapsing. Nobody could accept how controlled and committed they were to the agenda of the cult. Some knew that this would eventually implode. The human ego had kept us in a loop, repeating the same traumas we had lived before, again, and again. We were blinded by the pain, the suffering, the constant and never-ending hurt because we had visited this place many times. At crucial turning points within our galactic cycles, we began to see the negative forces push their agendas forward. We began to put together the pieces of the great interstellar puzzle. We were taught to feel separate from the world, from ourselves and from each other, divided by religions, cultures, and forced to distrust our intuition. But beyond power, money, and greed lay something far more powerful: human consciousness. The web of our consciousness had been hijacked by forces that opposed us. Once warped through fear, they could control it on every level. Our thoughts were contained to a few a day, and our actions only served their system. Humans had to experience themselves before they could understand who and what they truly were. So we dragged ourselves through a dark journey of consciously submitting ourselves to our masters. The hardest part was for those who were awake. They could see the oppression and cried out as people walked into the jaws of hell, one by one. They let their overlords manipulate and invert their consciousness. We warned them, of course, but they just ignored it. Their cage doors were firmly locked. People had no idea how deep this went. History had been erased and most completely forgot where they came from. The awakening that happened over those years were the stepping stones to a new reality. We couldn't understand it at first, as the truths were too much to digest. All over the world, people were understanding the abuse that was happening to them. We were slowly emerging. Through that painful and never-ending darkness came a brighter light. In a world where we cannot choose, our light becomes weak. Do you want your light to shine, or will you be overthrown by darkness?
The dark winter came after the first pandemic, and while everybody was paralysed from fear of the virus, we had something far greater that we were unprepared for. Cyber Polygon was the largest cyber attack ever to be executed. The world's internet was collapsed intentionally, and all of our rights to information were cut off. Banking, medical records, all databases were heavily attacked. Power grids were shut down, businesses were finished. Economies collapsed, forcing us closer and closer to the Great Reset. Most were not prepared for this annihilation, and were now frozen within the illusion of democracy. The puppets performed on stage, while we watched impassively. We had entered the dark winter without any awareness. When the attack finally came, it moved at lightning speed. The military were brought in to keep order on the streets, to assist the understaffed police. With the huge cut in funding, institutions broke down, resulting in a worldwide loss of confidence in government. People fought amongst themselves, and countries were close to a civil war. Many people died due to the civil unrest, and the casualties were out of control. The world was in a state of international emergency. You had to fight for yourself over those years. Economies had fallen, and unless you were self-sufficient, obtaining food was difficult. People had relied so much on the old system that when the rug was pulled from under our feet, we didn't realize what had happened. We were not prepared for those months. They had brought the attack forward as the few of us who had awoken started to reveal the mechanics to this evil. The algorithms inside the control rooms had told them that they had to attack us now. People's stupidity and denial of truth kept the majority running in the gerbil wheel. Most just fell into an even deeper sleep. We had fully immersed ourselves into their narrative, digesting and living the script they had planned for a very long time.
So many just blindly followed, lost in a heavy, suffocating, all-encompassing darkness. They created the money, they created the problems. They then created a solution that only limited us further. They used the excuse that the money isn't available to solve those problems, so we ended up caught in a whirlwind of dramas that stifled our human evolution. The creators of that money wanted control of our consciousness, and they would do everything to stop us. No one was going to save us from this horror. No leader could sufficiently lead us. We were emerging slowly, but would we change in time? We could only lead ourselves, but most people had been broken down by the constant abuse of control. We had to come together and find ways to connect, but most locked their houses and kept themselves barricaded in. The ones that were trapped in the cycle of fear were the ones that perished. When we stood strong, understanding our true power, this could not affect us. Your life is your human sovereignty. Each life is crucial. Each life must be questioned. When do you give your power away? Where do you feel powerless?
It was 30 years since they published the first paper, and in hindsight, we could see that everything was clearly laid out in their agenda. Capitalism had served its purpose, with the illusion of freedom and individual rights. What was coming had been dismissed over and over again as some far-out theory. The ultimate integration of AI had been marketed to us as a free energy utopia. Now we see this was simply part of the plan for ultimate worldwide control by the few. People were worn out, burnt down from the first round of lockdowns, and now most of society was jobless and reliant on the state. We went into the second year of lockdowns. Schools, universities, and all outside education was shut down due to the virus spreading amongst younger people. The education system was getting remodeled, and the technology that had been built for years was ready to release into their new world. Families were bound to their houses. So much stress, tension, fear, and confinement. Abuse cases rose. Families were torn apart. I came here as I thought this country had more freedom, opportunity, but now she's gone. It broke my heart to see my child taken from me. Day and night I longed to hold her in my arms. They told us the infections were rising at home. The virus had spread amongst families and people would be needed to be safeguarded underneath the new health protection law. They explained that your child would need to spend 2 weeks in an internment camp. You received a text and then you had to collect their belongings within 1 hour. A nurse took her away. It happened so quickly. They told me she'd be safe and under supervision. Then 2 weeks passed, then 3, 4, until 2 months had passed. I heard nothing. I finally received video call telling me she had been taken to the main camp as her health issues had escalated. I was alone and I couldn't leave my house. I could only view her on a screen. They told me she'd be home once she was well, but it had been 4 months and I had heard nothing. When I redialed the number, the line had gone dead. Cyber Polygon happened the month before, then internet access had become severely restricted. There was no way to reach her. I'm still searching for her. Now I risk my life every day by searching the streets for myself. I have to watch carefully, as the patrol cars are still keeping us under curfew. While the masses consumed the fear, society collapsed, and in the blink of an eye it was all taken from us. For who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. I remember that from school. I saw it happen to our world. We'd been kept in their illusion and trapped in their lies since birth, spoon-fed and carried to the point of no return. I lost my child, everyone I ever loved, and now I am here, empty and alone. I didn't realize she could be taken from me until it happened. I didn't know they could go this far. Once control and power is seized, life can never return back to normality. We must resist. We must break chains and ask the big questions. I have entered this dark place from which I cannot go back. Can you see what's ahead of you? How much of your life do you lead? Or do you let others continuously lead you?
Depopulation was a crucial step in the agenda, as the Sustainable Development Goals had to be achieved. Green Marxism had successfully led the planet into panic that we would die from the lack of resources. They drove the story that global warming was to blame for some parts of the world to be unlivable conditions. They said they need to cut back the population, a thinning, needing to reduce countries' populations by 5% every year. Extreme brutal measures were introduced, all in the name of saving the planet. Aimed mainly at the elderly, they targeted areas so the sleeping masses wouldn't believe the scandal. Pandemics became more normal. It became a continuous pattern to blaming people for the evil they created behind the scenes, resulting in divisions and infighting amongst us. They moved people into the cities and emptied rural areas, villages and small towns. Buildings became abandoned and left to ruin. Apparently this was to allow the greener areas to recultivate with wildlife and animals. But the main aim was actually to centralise the people and get us all in one place. The cities became marshalled by police and military checkpoints set up. People were dragged along the narrative of the first pandemic until it was too late. They pushed disarmament priorities around the world, but it was only a way for smaller countries to surrender to the superstates, a peaceful war if you like. This disarmed the individual, taking away more individual rights, and still the military, police and security units had their weaponry. They knew they were creating a bloodbath. They had no remorse. Compressing our freedoms, crushing us, psychologically breaking us down through fear, depression, anxiety, resulted in mass deaths on a daily basis. Without your ID card, you could not maneuver in society. Even getting food was difficult. My heart bled as this horror swallowed us, and we blindly walked into the jaws of hell. How did it come to this? This involved everybody, but the resistance was still weak. The majority felt powerless and trapped in the fear spell, almost waiting for someone to raise us out of this with heroic victory. The reality was, there was no one coming to save us. We had to do this together. Health and data became the way life was analysed, all controlled by algorithms. The system decided the trajectory of every single life, only judged by their inverted values. All freedoms removed. Even thoughts began to be erased. As if in a simulation, we were carried through their experiment with relative ease. The people that controlled it all were hugely successful behind their smokescreen, and we were under the illusion that they were just normal people like us. The fact was that they didn't even live the life we led. They saw it from their computers. They ate up the AI systems that fed them data. They decided the direction of the planet, but only because humans refused to trust their own guidance and denied their true connection. We let others steer our spiritual evolution and trapped ourselves within the false self. We had been carried on their ship for far too long and left to sink out at sea. Even some of the leaders who thought they would make it through were rejected. They only wanted people in their new world who would be controlled or dominated into submission. The AI system could only work this way. They know that humans can do unpredictable things, so they built the system to enforce laws with every possible outcome strengthening their power. However, there is a light. It is small, but we still have it. Their plan is still only in process. Intelligent people who think for themselves are dangerous to the central AI. Do you think for yourself? Do you trust yourself even when your views may be different from the masses? Ask the bigger question. How can you move through this world with integrity in every moment? Deep states were the underground networks that operated behind the seeming normality of corporate organizations. The spider web of services fed its way down, masked the infrastructure of our world. Working within all levels of the political, banking, media, and entertainment industries, they controlled our society, keeping people hypnotized within subconscious symbolism and subliminal messaging, so the herd could follow through with their plan. Their manipulation was the reason society continued with war, destruction, and was never truly at peace. The family factions had many agendas, but there was only one objective at the top. They fought amongst themselves, masking as countries and political parties, using puppets and heads of companies to stage their appearance to the public. People enjoyed following the lie, and most were fooled to believe that their leaders were heroes, but they were just reading a script and living their given program. Behind these leaders lay the true masters who never revealed their identities and were well hidden, locked deep in society's framework. They made their lives seem non-existent, staying in the shadows. Forming over 70 years ago, they had embedded themselves into society and reached full capabilities to dominate the consciousness of humans and the planet. But there was a weakness, a glitch in the matrix, which they could never control. So they implemented their synthetic biological world, full of chemicals, to diagnose and analyze the human body. But the AI had underestimated human strength.
They believed they were gods, that they owned humans, and in some ways that was true. Most humans never claimed their true sovereignty, almost wanting to be slaves. We had always been a product on the monetary markets, certificated as soon as we were born. We were sold the lie of freedom, and most were happy to eat up the mainstream lies like popcorn at the fun fair.
Until the structure started collapsing and more questions were asked, most had been fast asleep. Giving them full totalitarian control to inflict the order made the human race fall harder. The dark astral force had encompassed the planet, hijacked and bred itself into us without invitation. The AI systems now had a superintelligence that dominated the hive. We had been warned for the last 20 years of what was happening, but they were clever in creating the smokescreen. That super AI system could see the human evolution was reaching its own empowerment, so it was becoming very dangerous to them. We might just become aware of our reality. These parasitic energies could only attach to fear, and they could only evolve in darkness. When we came from the place of love, nothing could affect us, and we evolved in the light. It is only when we realized this that humans began to understand their true power. Once the corruption was completely exposed on the deep states, the house of cards would come tumbling down with lightning speed. Then a magical peace would fill the planet, and society would rebuild structures after the chaos. The old world would never come back. Many were still angry, disorientated by the transition, looking for someone to blame. But it was only their denial of the shadow that led to this dark world. Where do you pave the steps into a new world? How would you contribute to making the world brighter? Do you question your shadow?
Technological singularity was the point where all AI systems would surpass human intelligence. The AI would be capable of building itself at a rapid speed and communicate to all entities within the framework instantly. They had super sophisticated machines with satellites in the sky and algorithms that far surpassed human intelligence. Transhumanism was becoming the ultimate way of upgrading human life. Each individual could now transform into an AI self and live on the cloud systems. Our brains were wired to the main computer network. Man had fully merged with machine. Aging was abolished through their obsessive desire for immortality. Biological death was exceeded. Our worn-out organs were replaced by 3D printed ones controlled by the system. They wanted to play God, to control our thoughts, beliefs, and ideologies forever. But they had misunderstood one thing. They understood little about our integral human spirit and connection to Source. They used geoengineering as a way to influence the weather and atmospheric conditions. It was also a way to destroy worldwide agriculture and let the corporations gain control of food supplies. Growing food became illegal, and the licenses were only issued to those who were in the club. Due to health risks instigated from pesticide control, they now had completely regulated the way food was grown, limiting our natural diets and the variety of food we really needed. We were becoming walking chemical factories. Polluting the weather systems and controlling food supplies was preparation for something much more sinister. By using the excuse the planet was warming, they were able to spray into the skies and reflect the sun rays, apparently to block them out and cool the planet. Weather systems seemed to get more chaotic in places around the world, with an extreme drop in temperatures making the natural cycles go out of control. They owned the science and helped create a crisis. This was the catalyst for the normalization of geoengineering. They now had total control of the planet's weather, even being able to create and move clouds via their new satellites. This was all leading to our bodies being developed for this transhumanism, upgrade to fit into the cyborg planet that we had only up until now seen in the movies. In the mainstream, this was explained to us as necessary for our evolution into space. It had actually already happened at a much higher level. Now, they just needed to manipulate human consciousness to benefit and complete their agenda. It was always their system that we worked within, but they now had complete control in deciding what was available to who and when. People were in constant denial. Continuous refusal in seeing and accepting their own shadow had meant that this had all happened with our permission, within our perspective of the way things should be. Now our shadow was eating at us, as no one could accept how dark the evil had become. The cold, hard fact was that people drove this tyranny forward by sleepwalking through the mainstream narratives, following the story. The youth programs and green Marxism movement helped the fake agenda plough forward by fooling people and diverting their attention. This was a split in our world. Society was divided in its beliefs. The timelines had separated, and as the old society dissolved, most could not understand why they were here. Our shadow was manipulated at the point of vulnerability, allowing our dark brother to take us over. AI was in full control of society's movements, exponentially increasing itself to a point of no return. Even the so-called leaders of the systems lost control to their own arrogance. Its attempts to dismantle the divine human spirit was an act of desperation. This AI system could never understand the truth of humanity, which was defined by empathy, love, and compassion. There were some of us that made it through. We were not attached to the collective trauma of society. We could envision the beauty, we could imagine pure peace and tranquility, and we did, constantly. Through our power, determination, and focusing on our dreams, we create this reality and determine who and what we are. It was only our lack of knowledge and psychological understanding that pulled us into this evil claw. The singularity they wanted was like they were reversing the Big Bang, almost as if trapping our spirits, leaving our physical to remain dormant in the museum. We created negative situations on the planet, to have a higher understanding of ourselves. It was only at this level of understanding that we could make changes in our world. Every part of our daily practices were contributing to this pinnacle. But the masses needed the big questions to point everyone in the right direction. We have a choice in every instance. Everything is possible and it's all ours, ready to create, right now. So what path do you choose? Do you want to be empowered? Are you ready to emerge anew? Or do you choose to be a victim and allow the atrocities to expand?